why are
All
we
right,
doing
go.
this? It's just always
Yes,
important.
yes. Yeah, there needs to be like more categories for like important, like, there's like important to me, but that's different for like next important thing for the product, people
For the customer.
or their customer, right?
Yeah.
Important for
Usually
my
ends up taking a
sanity.
back seat. Yeah.
Yeah.
Back when I was in
Important
middle school and high school was when beepers, pagers were like the rage. So cell phones were just starting to come out, but barely anybody had them. But everybody had a pager, And so you were limited
I
to what you
remember
could say. You
this.
basically just send your own number. You're like, here's my number, call me. And then they learned, if I put 911 in front of it, that's code for this is super important, So like people started to develop protocols for like, no, honestly, call me right now versus just call me whenever you want to. But then everybody just did the product manager thing where everything's urgent. They just put 911 in front of every single page. So it became just a standard thing that you always did 911. So much so that some people didn't even know what it meant. They just thought that's what you do. So similar to, I just put bang important on all my styles too, just because this one's the most important.
I think there's a market for pagers. I think they could come back. I really do. If there was like a lightweight, low energy, text only async device, like that sounds nice to me. I would like that to exist. Not something that can interrupt me,
right?
And like annoy me with a video before I know what's going on. Like just pure text. That was a good time. It might be nostalgia. I don't know.
Somehow they'll get Slack onto it.
They'll get Slack onto it. The other nice thing about it was you had plausible deniability because there's no read receipts, right? So, and you didn't necessarily have a phone with you. Like you had to go to a payphone or you had to go upstairs and ask somebody. It's like I saw your page, but I didn't have a phone, so I couldn't call you. I couldn't call you. I had lots of easy lies.
That'd be perfect for right now. Yeah, I was gonna get to you as soon as I found a payphone.
Right. It's like pre-internet ghosting.
Public phones. What a weird idea now. Post-pandemic. Yeah.
Well, it's super.
All right. So, folks. Yeah, I think we're ready. Are we live already?
We're live on YouTube. We're not recording, so we're still pretty
okay. Cool. All right. Yeah, I think we're ready to roll. Okay. Brian, just so I'm not butchering your last name, it's LeRoux, right? LeRoux. Yeah. LeRoux. I just called it LeRoux for some reason. I was like, LeRoux.
Oh, it's totally okay. I respond to hey you or LeRoux or whatever.
Well, I mean, you have like the most generic first name, right? So at least, your first name is like, like I'm sure I am so rarely butchered, I'm sure.
So it's true. I do get confused with Ryan very often.
Oh, yeah. See, this is like problems people with basic names have. Just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Oh,
middle-aged white guy problems.
Like sometimes people call me Ryan.
Yeah. This is the extent of my problems.
Yeah. Alrighty. So I think cool. we can roll. And what episode number is this?
This is episode 177. Is everybody recording locally?
Okay.
Yes.
Will you mind doing a clapper just so it's easy for me in post? I'll say 3, 2, 1, and then on 0 we'll all clap loudly. Ready? 3, 2, 1. Brian, did you clap audibly, or did you say what are we doing, or what happened
there?
do I
did
sound
not
okay?
Clap loudly. Sorry.
Okay. You do.
3 out of 4 ain't bad. We'll work with it. Cool. I'm going to disappear. I'm going to play the theme song. I'm going to be hanging around and holler in Slack if you need me. Have fun, y'all.
Thank you, Jared.
You can hide non-video participants so you don't get to see my big avatar. I highly recommend it.
All right.
Okay.
Hello, party people. We're super excited about today's show. I'm so excited I actually forgot. What episode number is this?
177.
177. Thank you. Episode number 177. And we're talking about rendering patterns today. Super kind of fundamental stuff to how we deliver incredible user experiences, single page applications, server-side rendered, everything in between. We're going to cover history. We're going to cover kind of bleeding edge topics, and we're going to be hopefully doing a twinkle in the eye look ahead. And we're super excited to have a very special guest with us today, Brian LeRoux. Hello, Brian.
Hi. I'm stoked to be here. Thanks for having me.
We're stoked to have
this
you.
Topic.
Yeah, it's a great topic. It's a topic that I'm genuinely concerned about fitting into an hour. So we'll have to, Nick, you're going to have to keep us on track because, I feel like I'm going to nerd out. So bad host today. And speaking of Nick, welcome, Nick.
Hoi, hoi. I'm happy to be here, partially rehydrating.
So punny. How many puns can we fit into today? I wonder. So Brian, before we get started, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. Hi, everybody out there in the internet. I'm Brian. I've been around here for a while now. I've been responsible for all kinds of bad websites since the 90s, and some good ones too. And I'm really passionate about this space and the topic, especially things like accessibility and the web as a whole. This is Global Accessibility Day, so it's a good day to talk about rendering. And I'm the CEO of Begin.com. I guess I should plug that. We are an elegant platform for building full stack web apps. So you should check that out if you're into that. And that's me.
That's super cool. And you've worked on some pretty cool open source projects, and you've also been involved with the mobile web space for a very long time. Do you want to give us an insight into that?
That's right. I almost blocked all that out. So these days I'm mostly working on sort of serverless tech, things that are on demand and scale to zero. But I think the thing I kind of became known for, and the thing I was working on for almost a decade, was called PhoneGap, and then later Apache Cordova. And that was really sort of rose up during when JavaScript became acceptable socially to admit you did, around 2008, 2009 timeframe. This is a funny thing, the way I remember it anyways, JavaScript used to be uncool. And now it's the coolest thing ever. It's oh, really? Okay, I'm here for that. But, didn't used to be the case.
It feels like we've got a new tagline for JavaScript. It's JavaScript, socially acceptable since 1999.
Yeah, there was a good run there where it was not considered cool, and still isn't in many circles, which is funny. But yeah,
still lots of trolls. I agree.
There are. Yeah, it's a perpetual problem with the internet. We're always refilling it with lots of negativity as well as positivity, unfortunately. Anyways.
TypeScript seems to be soothing some of those problems a little, though. I think there's a decent number of trolls who've kind of been permanently silenced by TypeScript, I think, but still, still lots more out there. But yeah, so you've been involved with that. Brian is super humble, but yeah, he's been working on the web for a long time on some pretty cool projects, and somehow managed to live life on the edge, I feel because everything, even kind of the serverless movement, you've really kind of got involved with that pretty early. I think you're a subject matter expert on the serverless framework, and you're a contributor. And did you create it? I don't even know what the backstory is.
No. I was there from the very beginning for sure. That was created by a dude named Austin, and he's got a company around that. I work on one called OpenJS Architect, which would be, I guess, technically a competitor, but I don't really believe in that concept in open source. They take a different approach than we do, and they do good stuff. But yeah, I always end up, this is an affliction of mine. I get interested in something probably prematurely, and then I go all in. When mobile was happening, I was really excited about that. That was a big deal. And Steve Jobs was like, hey, you're going to build websites and they're going to run on your phone. That blew my mind completely. The idea of even seeing maps on your phone was novel at that point. and getting like directions was a pretty weird idea. So like apps have come a long way in 10 years, and in a sense actually predicated the whole SPA thing. And then, yeah, when I saw serverless happening, I'd had been doing a bunch of cloud stuff for PhoneGap actually up to that point. And I saw Lambda get demoed with API Gateway in 2015. And it's like something snapped. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's how that's all going to work. Like, we're not going to load balance containers. That's a ridiculous proposition. Why would you do that? Let somebody else do that and outsource it to them. Right. And so for me, that was just immediately obvious in 2015. Here we are in 2021, and that's still news to some people. But that's kind of my curse and my blessing. So I'll see these things as they're happening and get excited about them and kind of glom onto it maybe a little earlier than I should.
Well, I mean, and for anyone who's listening, this is exactly why I wanted to talk about this topic with Brian. I feel like he's got some really unique insights as someone who's worked on these technologies, but also I think he's a little bit of a Kramer in the sense that I think, I'm curious to hear what his predictions are as somebody who's, lived life on the edge for quite a long time. So let's talk about some of the kind of, how rendering started on the web. All right. So we know there's 3 primitives, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and they weren't even all official at the same time, right? Like HTML was first.
Oh,
yeah. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, style sheets actually came later, and JavaScript came even later than that. And JavaScript was quite late, comparatively, years later.
Right.
The first style sheets, you can actually see in the source code for the original, I can't remember the next browser that Tim Berners-Lee had worked on. And back then it was like H1 and H2 could be styled differently, and that was about it. Blink and Marquee were much later, and other fun techniques. But originally the whole concept was around the document. And I think this kind of gets forgotten sometimes, but like there is no JavaScript without that document. You have to render a script tag at some point in order to get the JavaScript running. So it's the very first thing that's going to happen. And it's a pretty guaranteed thing to happen. Whereas the rest of this stuff isn't necessarily guaranteed. We don't really know for sure if that thing is going to load. The sub resources, might be turned off. They might be turned off for good reasons because of accessibility. They might be turned off for bad reasons like bandwidth or network or who knows why. But that HTML will always get there, and that'll be the first thing. And that's really where we all started. When I first started looking at this stuff many years ago, it was pretty much CGI scripts and Perl, and good luck with that. And then, time prevailed, and Microsoft decided they'd help us, and we got ASP Classic. Somewhere in there, Cold Fusion and PHP happened. And in all these cases, we were running a dynamic process, a trusted process, we would call it. It was a process I controlled, and that would generate HTML, usually based on some kind of database rows or something like that, and it would return it. And then some point around 2007, 2008, I think it was, GitHub did GitHub Pages, and they were like, hey, we could just do static assets and we could pre-render this stuff. And I think a lot of people thought that was a pretty good idea for a large number of use cases, especially static content that's not changing. No point in using a dynamic process for that. It doesn't need to be trusted if it's public content, so you don't have to have any kind of calls to a database or anything like that. And so that was the original sort of pre-rendering thing that never really had a name. And then weirdly, I guess, somewhere along the line, Netlify decided to call it Jamstack, although I still don't quite understand how JavaScript APIs and markup equals pre-rendering, and I don't think it does. I think they are different things, and those goalposts are currently moving. And yeah, I guess SPAs became a bit of a thing too. When JavaScript became socially acceptable around 2009 timeframe, there were a lot of projects out there that were trying to be mobile. And I'm not talking about like PhoneGap stuff. I'm just talking about web pages.
DojoX Mobile.
Yeah, and it was like you had to pinch and zoom to get to the form, and it was terrible. And no one liked that. And so, reloading a page over a 3G network, flash of unstyled content, it's just bad. So SPAs became really popular as a way to deal with that navigation transition jank, and especially popular in embedded web apps like PhoneGap and Cordova, Electron, the Ionics of the world. And it's just continued to get popular, although I don't know that it is necessarily appropriate for all things. Browsers are faster now. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, it's funny to, please finish your thought. And
well, I was just going to babble my way into saying that, none of these are good and bad is kind of my disclaimer on this. Like if you're building a single page app, that's probably appropriate for your context and good for you. That's awesome. And there are trade-offs that come with that, and it might not be appropriate for all contexts. If all your data is dynamic and trusted and needs to be accessed through a database because it's secured and needs to be more than one user that can access different private data, then that has to be dynamic. You can't pre-render that. So it's not a bad thing. It's just the constraints of the use case that you have. So different ways to deal with that. Single page apps don't have to be static per se. They can call out using APIs, but now we're inviting Spinorama to the party, and not everybody likes loading a page full of spinners. So there's that trade-off, which maybe doesn't matter. Yeah, I'm just going to keep hedging here.
Spinorama. Wow, that was quite the like storytelling journey. Thank you. Spinorama. I'm gonna totally use that from now on. Like I just call it like
my bank does this
wheel of
me.
Death or something.
Like, it makes me so much anxiety, and I know that they think they've got a good Lighthouse score because those spinners load so fast. But the last place I want to see a non-deterministic page is my bank statement. Like the last place. Like I want that rendered right away. I want to know that you have that data and it's safe. And all they're telling me is like, yeah, we might get to that. There's going to be some eventual consistency here. And often there is, some spinners finish loading, other ones don't. And it's like, what is going on this page?
Right. Oh gosh. Well, I mean, so you mentioned SPAs like being this thing that were like that's made mobile particularly painful, and mobile. Well, I would say viewing the web from a mobile device. And for me, I kind of think of SPAs as something like, I feel like they were totally designed for desktop. And so it was really interesting to even hear you talk about the mobile case, because folks weren't even like when single page applications became a thing, right? I don't know, was this like sometime in like early 2000s or something like that is like when they kind of started to become a hot new thing. Frameworks like Backbone and Angular kind of popularized. Actually, was there something before Backbone that helped with I feel like CanJS or there were
Dojo.
There were some Dojo. Yeah,
Dojo
right.
did all that.
Of course, yeah. Yep. Dojo did everything first, right? Yeah. I was like, what else? I'm like, I know Backbone wasn't first. Though. Yeah. But and I'm sure like even before that, like a bunch of unknown, like kind of just like one-off tools or processes. I'm sure people were, it's just kind of like, when did it hit big? But somewhere in the early 2000s, and desktop was like, folks were just really profiling for desktop, and like the whole kind of thick client movement that it was like, oh, move everything to the client, right? Like everything was server rendered previous to this, and now with things like Ajax, we had this like way of doing partial rendering in the client, and it was all about trying to make experiences fast and optimized for hardwired desktop connections. And like, that's something that we're just still so stuck with in like 2020, like the web has moved on. It's accessed more on tiny devices that are touchscreen and that have intermittent connectivity. And we're still like, our primary use case, even when new products like roll out, we are assuming hardwired desktop, and so it's interesting how that SPA kind of architecture has really stuck around for this long,
Well, it's getting good, and like it's never going to recreate the whole browser as good as the browser can be. but it's getting pretty good, and the tooling is getting pretty sharp, and the frameworks allow people to have a consistent mental model to work against their artifact. And so instead of having clean separation of concerns, we have one mental model for everything, and everything is coming out of that one place. And I get it. I mean, that's nice. There's an arity argument for simplicity. It's more simple if there's only one way to think about your JavaScript. Unfortunately, that JavaScript probably runs in a couple places. It's going to run in Node, and it's going to run in the browser at least. And those are different runtimes. And that creates an impedance mismatch, which does create problems. And yeah, I think it makes sense. The pendulum always swings around between client and server over the years. And we're fully deep in the client right now. And a lot of people are going, hey, this doesn't smell right.
Yeah, and people are trying to, definitely, like, the pendulum has swung the other way in terms of, I think, thought circles, right? So obviously there's like the web in reality, and then there's, like the web that we are striving for. Those are two different things. And I think, folks like the intellectual circles and the like best practices have shifted towards, hey, SPA probably not the best use case for most things. However, like, it's not one size fits all, right? So it really depends on your use case. It's server side rendered versus not, like, there's kind of this rubric that you need to go through for yourself and make sure that you're not over optimizing either, right? Because you don't want to try to solve problems you don't have, which is a tough thing in our community, like, because there's a lot of hive thinking. It's like, must do this new thing, or must like, without really understanding like why and what problem it's solving. So
do you think that is what do you think that's what precipitates these pendulum swings back and forth between server side and client side? It's something popular, like, I don't know, Facebook, for example, solving their big, massive at scale problems with something like React, and then everyone following that. And then now maybe swinging back to more of like a server side thing with like Next.js or things like that. What do you think precipitates that to just constantly swing back and forth?
Well, there's lots of ways to kind of look at this lens. I think appeals to popularity and authority are a big part of it, for sure. That people, no one got fired for buying Oracle in the 80s, and no one gets fired for choosing React today. And I think it's a really solid question, because I don't think there's a clean answer to this one. Like, what are the predicates for shifts? There are massive technology shifts going on right now. So pre-rendering has truly been a solution for cold start. It takes a second to talk to that database. Whereas if you pre-render and you eat that cost locally at author time with your build step, your user gets a much faster experience. And so that is slowly becoming no longer true. Computers are getting faster. It's not a controversial statement. Networks are getting faster. It's pretty obvious that's happening as well. So do we need to eat this step anymore? And will we continue to need to eat this step on our local dev machine? And I think the answer is probably no, as of like a few years ago, but it takes a while for this stuff to catch up. And other things change too, like I said, it used to be pretty socially unacceptable to ship JavaScript to the client. Clearly that has changed. Now it is acceptable to ship as much JavaScript as you want to the client. And maybe that's worth examining in a lens of accessibility, because I don't think it is actually true that it's super acceptable for all cases, but it can't be for some. Like, you can't paint the whole. The beauty and the wonder of this whole thing that we get to work on is that it is diverse, and that there are, like, thank God there's so many options, and that we have this amount of complexity and confusion, because if the opposite is way worse. The sort of dead years of the web, and IE was the dominant browser and had no innovation at all, was horribly painful, and we had to resort to some pretty ugly hacks. Like, we used to manually make rounded corners. Can you believe that? Like, what the hell? Why were we doing that?
Yeah,
and where would the world be now if we weren't spending time on that back in the dead years of the browser?
Seriously. Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. Well, in the next segment, we're going to get into some of the specifics around what were kind of the pivotal game-changing moments around rendering patterns. And we'll dive into some of the current bleeding edge, super forward-thinking architectures and patterns that are being tossed around in the what I like to call the cigar club of JavaScript, the like smoking cigars and like intellectualizing on, how the web should be community. So we'll get into that and more. Talk soon, folks. All right, cool. Sorry, we just realized we didn't really, how are we doing on time? Did we start like, it's a little over 20 minutes for our first segment, or are we around? Is Jared there?
Yeah, it was about
20. I don't
my
know. When did we
didn't start.
Oh no!
I'm so sorry. Even with my lame clap.
Well, that's okay. I'm glad we checked or paused, or I don't know. But like, yeah, you can fix it.
I'll kick a recording when we start our next segment again.
Yeah, you can start it even now. It's fine because it'll. Yeah, I think he'll be able to probably edit out any breaks and stuff. You don't need to like stop the recording for breaks.
Yep. Yeah, it'll be fine.
Yeah.
We can just use the Zoom recording for the first part.
Yeah. Cool. So yeah, so do you think we can take a quick segue into the like web worker ESM CDN world before getting into the specifics of the
I can talk about that for sure.
Cool. All right. And then I think maybe we start with just a very quick recap of like, we start like what the evolution has been. So, server side, then kind of SPA, Jamstack / static content, whatever. And we're kind of in this hybrid space now. I don't know. Do you think, Nick, is it worth doing a recap? Like, I don't know.
I feel like maybe we covered a bit of that. We
covered that a bit. Okay. Yeah, it feels redundant. Okay. Let's move on then. Okay. We'll get started. You good, Brian?
Yes, I've started recording again.
Okay. All right. So that was okay. Okay. Cool. All right. Well, I'll get started. Wow. So what a wild journey the web has had through its discovery. I heard a long time ago the web being described as being in its teenage years, or it's in its kind of like 20s, or so it's still very much discovering itself, and it really feels like that's maybe a permanent feature of the web, is like the constant innovation and discovery. Earlier you were saying, computers are getting faster. And so, that's, we're kind of being saved by our compute power improving. However, I think for me, there's a linear kind of correlation there with also web apps being more complex, and so it's like, our hardware is getting better, but, we're doing a lot more. So, so it's a challenge.
And we might hit a wall with like Moore's law slowing down, right? So will we hit a wall with complexity, or will that just keep skyrocketing past?
Yeah.
I know what I think.
Right. Totally. You should start a betting pool on that, but the kind of like there's been some really key moments for the web around like not just actually native web APIs, but also tools and technologies that have like really helped with how we pivot and create better experiences for our users. We kind of get into some of those like Ajax, CDNs, serverless APIs, ESM, web workers, service workers, even GraphQL has changed the game for shipping less data on, like tiny devices and reducing the API maintenance surface area for developers, right? You don't need to maintain like a mobile version of an API. Can you kind of talk to some of the things that you see as like really kind of game changing?
Well, Ajax was definitely one of the things. You don't hear that one very often anymore, but it used
Nobody
to be,
loves Ajax.
I know what they do. They're
like...
doing it. They just call it partial hydration now or something. So Jesse James Garrett is the guy that coined the term. He used to work at a company called Adaptive Path, and the predicate for it was this tiny API that Microsoft actually pioneered called XML HTTP request, which is a real mouthful and inconsistently spelled too. Yeah, so it's like really irksome to web platform people that look at that and they see XML HTTP requests, and it's like an annoying API. But it used to be the way to make a network request from the client to the server, and back then we did XML, so that was why we got the name. And funny enough, people used to actually send document fragments very often back then. So you would send chunks of HTML over the wire. So this wasn't a new thing that had been recently discovered. This has been going on since.
It's called Hotwire.
Yeah. And I don't know, Ajax really lifted the JavaScript thing out of the dark ages. At that point, it was generally considered a thing you would use for validation, and that would be about it. You would validate your form so the user didn't have to submit it to discover that they entered something incorrectly. And then Ajax gave us permission to start rendering little chunks of UI. And then that really started snowballing fast into where we are today, where we're outsourcing as much to the client as we can. CDNs have been a pretty pivotal thing for this, especially recently. CDN used to be, where I put my fonts and stuff. And now CDN is like the fronter for everything that happens. It is the sort of API gateway, as it were, for the user interface. And
that's content delivery network, in case our fans aren't aware.
Yeah, and so CDNs are a funny one because people toss the term around now for just about anything, but really it's supposed to mean that there are data centers closer to the user. And so many of the people purporting to be CDNs do not operate data centers. They build on top of people like Amazon and Akamai to do what they do. And the idea is you push the content closer to the data center where the person is, and now you're only bound by the speed of light. And that's kind of nice. CDNs typically only deal in static stuff, although that is changing fast. We're now starting to put functions on the edge.
Yeah, so much edge compute happening.
Mm-hmm.
There used to be best practice info out there about like loading your static JavaScript from CDNs, like jQuery or those. Yeah, because then it would be shared by everyone, and you'd probably already have it loaded by the time you got to your site.
Yeah, we've kind of lost that with the bundle thing a little bit, and probably for the better. Is the joke would be we don't want John Resig to go rogue and take out half the internet. If you've never met John Resig or seen him speak, the idea of him going rogue is pretty funny. But
that did happen, right? With I think like Douglas Crockford and the JSON parser, didn't that? Am I remembering that correct?
This is tickling a cobweb in my brain right now, but the idea would be, anyways, you can't really necessarily trust the internet, and if you're loading your source code from some third party that you don't control, then you might have a bad day. Your data could get exfiltrated, cookies could get stolen, puppies will die, whatever. It would be a bad day. But I think that's a case by case. If you're a financial services company or you're dealing in healthcare data, then load on your own same origin. Don't use third-party CDN. If it's a static web page for your personal site or something, no worries. It's probably fine.
Yeah, there's actually one of my favorite security headers is around just having a very strict allow list for what origins you will accept running JavaScript from, and that's like such an easy way to get a bunch of really good coverage around not having people hijack your website or whatever. So
this is the beauty of the web. The same origin sandbox is so powerful and has allowed us to outsource untrusted computers all over the world, including devices in your pocket like your phone. And that's it's a little bit getting lost in the complexity of the day. But at the end of the day, if you can put everything on the same origin with the same URL and you control that DNS, then you have a really high guarantee that sandbox is secure, which is publishing. We've never really had this in the history of humanity before. Like, anyone can publish anything, anywhere, at any time to a trusted place and verify that that's probably safe and good. It's kind of nice.
Right. Totally. Yeah, totally agreed. And so like kind of looking at this like movement of, Jamstack and or the pre-rendered, what's the term is escaping me, statically rendered content or whatever, right? Like there's, serverless APIs, I think, have been a huge kind of enablement for that as well. And also just to a degree, not just like serverless APIs, but I guess CDNs too, in theory, could, have also like really like the CDN plus the serverless APIs have made that marriage really kind of tight. But
yeah, the thing that kind of happened, I think anyways, and this is super up for debate in the comments, but we realized that we needed indemnity or determinism, or another fancy word is immutability. We wanted to get the thing we thought we would get when we deployed that thing. So in the dynamic world, we've got lock files and infrastructure as code. In static world, we don't need any of that. You pre-render it, it's done. You baked it, you can see it. And when you deploy it, that's what happens. In the server world, servers are very stateful. They have all kinds of stuff going on. They got operating systems, they got runtimes, they've got patches, they've got network adapters, they've got different cloud providers. Like they're very, very stateful, which is a nice way of saying they're bug farms. And you kind of end up in this place where indemnity is very difficult to achieve. And so reproducibility is difficult to achieve. And if things aren't reproducible, then you're going to have a bad day trying to fix that bug because you can't reproduce it necessarily. It works on my machine, becomes like a real problem. So the CDN and the move to static is a big endorsement of being stateless and deterministic. And these are also faster. So there's just like a lot of guarantees here. And I don't mean runtime faster. I mean faster developer velocity. When I can reproduce a bug quickly locally, that's exactly the same to the version I thought it was. And then when I prove I fixed it, that's nice. I get to go home at 5. If I'm running at something on my machine, I'm like, it works here. It doesn't work when it ends up in Kubernetes. That's a bad day. And
yeah.
That's kind of how we got here. The problem is if we do all this work at author time, it gets slow. And there's no real fix for this one. If you have a 1,000,000-page website, you're going to make for 1,000,000 pages to build. And this is a good problem to have, by the way. You got 1,000,000 pages of content, sweet. That's awesome. It sucks that if you change the copyright, you got to wait for that whole thing to rebuild to discover that you got the spelling wrong on one page or something. And I guess that kind of like pushes us into this newer world where we're trying to find hybrid techniques for dealing with that build step.
Yeah, I mean, optimizing that feels very much like a problem that we can engineer ourselves out of, with like hashes and just more, cached binaries and whatever else. And so, but yeah, I think we could, faster, exactly, right. It's like we can totally engineer ourselves out of that problem. I think web workers, and service workers have also like done some tremendous things for, improving the web, in terms of getting things off the main thread with web workers, and service workers have kind of changed the game of like, there's a proxy in the browser now, and you can have really smart caching managed via JavaScript and like not via complex headers, and you have a lot more flexibility in how you cache, and your strategy can change really like in a way that's very responsive to your user's client. And I think that's just, for me, I feel like service workers is probably my favorite. Like if I had to pick one API that came out in the past 10 years, API tool, framework, whatever, like it would probably be service workers. They're just so underappreciated in terms of like how powerful it is to have like a proxy in the browser and like what that means for like just a caching strategy and like how easy it is to progressively create that strategy, it's huge.
Yeah, we use them for dealing with state with our WebSocket. And so what we used to do is we had a listener, it would get socket events and then would modify some state, and then we had something observing that state, and then that would re-render, the DOM elements that we need to re-render. And like you said, it's kind of computationally expensive and block up the main thread. And sometimes you'd have a moment where you'd be scrolling and it'd be like, you knew it was talking to the WebSocket when it did that. And as soon as we pushed that into a worker, all these issues went away. And now we have this wonderful little state manager hanging out in the background. It's just chucking data into the DOM and indirectly. And I've that in ES modules have probably been the two. Well, that ES modules and fetch. And so these are all kind of semi-related things like networking, background tasks, and a module system. Oh my God, we have one.
I'd say Indexeddb too. If we're talking about fetch, how could I forget, right? Indexeddb, Indexeddb kind of, just giving you a really smart, not the best API, but the smart way to be able to kind of manage your cached or persistent data. You can version it, and it's a lot, it's great. Some really good libraries help you deal with some of the quirks around the API. So we'll link them in the show notes for like good abstractions on Indexeddb. And I don't even think it's recommended that you like folks are like, just use a library to like abstract it, because it's just managing it on your own is just a little much. But yeah, so all these awesome web APIs, right, have kind of changed the game. ESM, totally. How could I forget about ESM? ESM is, probably true kind of.
I wish I could forget about ESM.
Yeah. Oh no. Well, I mean, if you're from the Node community, maybe it's painful getting there, but
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's probably an easier one to forget because it's been kind of abstracted away for so long that you just forget about it not actually being something that existed natively in a browser, and now it does. And
we actually, as far back I think as 2016, we've been using ES modules, naked standard spec ES modules, not the transpiled kind, in the browser very happily. And it is extreme. I've been telling people this for years. It's fast. And finally, in the last 6 months, people are like, "Hey, did you know it's fast?" I'm like, yes. I'm very aware it's fast. Yeah. It's built into the browser. Of course, it's fast. The only downside is after you get a larger graph, you end up in a waterfall. So now we're still stuck with the bundle step. But what a joy to have. And I don't know if y'all have been playing with Deno at all, but to have a runtime like Node, except for uses ES modules, is a lot of fun. And there's clear to me, like, this was and still is extremely painful, and it shouldn't have gone this way. We should have paved the cow path that we had, but we didn't. That's fine. We are where we are, and where we are is we have two module systems and they're competing, and we're fixing that by adding a third and compiling into the native one, and that's not great, and it's probably not going to last all that long. Eventually, people are going to be like, "Hey, we already have a module system. Why are we compiling into this other third one?" And it's a bit of a pain because there's so much great JavaScript code that's been written in the last decade that is probably going to get abandoned to historical obscurity because it didn't follow along with the latest stuff. And people can say that you can transpile to fix that problem, but it's better than transpiling to fix that problem. Not having that problem.
Not having it. Yeah. Oh man, I feel like there's not a world where we're never going to have like no build steps. I mean, just because I think even just beyond transpiling, right, there's so many other benefits that you can get just with accessibility and whatever else, and just managing your, different versions for different browsers. But yeah, I hear you. Like, if we could have never transpiled, like if we could just like end one thing in JavaScript, I'd say like, yeah, let's just get rid of transpiling. Like everyone just use JavaScript that's legal. Yeah. And spec. Yeah. It's like especially for like our dependencies, it's like a huge bottleneck. And so, but anyways.
Meanwhile, I'm just over here writing TypeScript and completely relying on transpiling.
Oh man.
You are right, by the way. There is no version of this story where we don't do it. And there's a technical reason for that. And so we can sort of like put a pin in this one as a discussion point, because sometimes people do think it's like an either or, but there is no or. So the network is hostile. The network is strange and weird. The topology is unknown, and the performance is unknown. And there's nothing we can do about that. And because of that fact, we have to fingerprint our files, which is a fancy way of saying we need to be able to invalidate the cache. If I have index.js being served from my origin, usually that's going to work. And usually you'll get a fresh version every time. But you can't guarantee that. There could be a third-party proxy in the way that caches that index.js forever. And this isn't hypothetical. This happens a lot out there. So we have to fingerprint these files in order to invalidate the cache so that our users get the latest version every time. And if we have to fingerprint the file, we have a build step. No one wants to look at a file named index-guid.js. That's going to be uncool. Yeah. You want to, so for those that are not familiar with it, fingerprinting is a technique where we'll create a hash of the contents of the file and we'll append that to the file name. And this ensures the file is unique, and then we can cache it forever. And then if there's a new version of that file, the fingerprint will be different, and that's what will be loaded the next time. So there's always a build step to fingerprint. If you're doing this in any form of scale, you'll discover this caching issue with the network. As soon as you've accepted that there's a build step, that's when things get difficult or tricky, because now it's like, well, might as well use Babel stage 6 stuff. That's where you end up with decorators being rewritten 3 times.
Right. I'm going to use my own JavaScript, right? My own custom transform. Yeah. This is how I would have written the map API, So yeah. Anyway, so I love how Brian's, we're going to put a pin in it, is like turns into like a master class. This is like, my favorite type of nerd. So thank you, Brian. So we've been yapping so much. We haven't even had a chance to get into some of the fun acronyms that I'm excited to learn more about in today's show, like ISR and DSR, and some of all the other things that the cool kids are talking about. So folks in the cigar club, or whatever we're calling it, the intellectual, the philosophizing club, just gonna hang tight till the next segment. We'll talk to you in a bit. All right, sorry. Yeah, that was heavy, but I think it was really good for setting a foundation, so we can focus on those libraries, the new patterns for the rest of the talk, and maybe some decision-making stuff around like when to do what. That sounds good. Yeah.
Please prompt to get those things out. I think that's the most probably important thing that we could teach people, is the
decision-making
rubric for thinking with decision-making.
Yeah, totally. All right, well, let's get started. Nick, does that sound good to you as well?
Yep.
Okay, cool. All right. Okay, folks, we're going to try to contain our nerd for this last segment. So bear with us. So we've talked about some of the evolutions on the web, or in terms of rendering patterns, and some of the, not even evolutions, I would say revolutions, right? Sometimes since we've made this 180, or is it 180 or 360? I don't even know. Full circle. Either way, we're
coming to 360 now.
We're coming to 360.
The client render was definitely a 180 from the.
Oh yeah, client render was 180. Yeah, now we're coming back to 360, and we've talked about some of the kind of cool power APIs that have powered these changes and enabled this stuff. And so now kind of let's talk about some of the stuff that's really, really bleeding edge. So there's some patterns being pushed, like ISR and DSR. So what are these things, Brian?
Well, I think they're primarily marketing. So we got to keep an eye on that. But I don't think that's necessarily bad. And sometimes marketing does turn into categories and thought processes. But the sort of crux of the problem with the client rendering everything, and it is you got to wait for that JavaScript to get loaded. If you pre-render, you fix that, but now you got to wait for the build. And so, is there a happy medium? Can we do some build, but not all the build? And this is where incremental static render comes in. It's definitely kind of more marketing than a term I've heard, organically grow out of community consensus. It's basically Vercel's idea. And Vercel's idea is your component model will be aware that it is going to come in as an initial state, and then asynchronously it will statically render, and the next person will always get the static render, but somebody's going to get spin around it. Or I think sometimes people call it stale when revalidating or something like that.
Yeah. I was going to say that sounds like the stale while revalidate pattern. I'm like, oh, I didn't realize it was kind of being rebranded in this. ISR,
yeah, it is. So I'm going to try really hard not to be cynical, but I do want to just point out, when these things are more organic community terms that have kind of come up from a consensus of fellow collegiate technologists or something that came out of a marketing blog post. So ISR is kind of more the marketing blog post and sort of pushes things towards Next.js and Vercel's idea of stale when revalidate, which is fine. That is a very valid technique. You do end up with spin around as your goal, but maybe your goal is okay for that. Like maybe your app is, I don't know, like back office widget ordering form for your supply chain manager. Doesn't care if there's like a spinner, but if it's like the place where I'm going to get my vaccine appointment booked, maybe not a spinner, right? Maybe that should be a form that loads for sure. And this is where things get sort of tricky. DSR is Netlify's sort of response to ISR. So Netlify saw ISR and was like, oh, that's cool, except now you don't have indemnicy. You don't have a mutable deterministic build. You've got a placeholder that's spinning before you get the thing that you thought you would get. And so their model's always been about these immutable deploys, and you always get the same thing. So DSR is the same thing as ISR, except for distributed static render. And the idea is somebody out in the network pays for that first load. And so it won't render it, it renders it on demand or progressively when it's been requested, and that's it. So it's like DSR, or DSR is like ISR, except for there's no spinner. But otherwise roughly the same idea. And I guess, these are just trade-offs. Like if you've got a gigantic content site and it's got, hundreds and hundreds of pages, and you just change the copyright, that's a pain in the ass. You don't want to wait for the whole thing to load. So sure, like push that up and let someone else pay for that render when it needs to be requested and happen. And I think that's totally cool. I don't know how you model this yourself. So these are kind of proprietary to the Vercel framework and the Netlify platform. So if you want to port these concepts over to Azure or AWS or something else like that, you probably have to do some of your own magic to make that happen. But ultimately, these are just tricks for pushing that cache invalidation problem around. Who gets the stale and who gets to deal with the build step? And increasingly, the programmers are like, I don't want to deal with this build step. I want to get back to work. I gotta close these tickets. I got stuff to do, and waiting on this build is not part of that. And so this is where, for me, things kind of start heading back in the full circle direction, especially as technology improves. Lambda cold start used to be a few seconds. Now it's 100 milliseconds. So dynamic render with a Lambda function is actually not all that unreasonable, and lots of people out there are doing it now. BBC is probably the most famous one, where the whole website is going through a Lambda function on the way out. And people will say, "Oh, that's more slow," or it's inefficient. I've also heard, well, it doesn't have to re-render it every time. You can cache. You still have headers. The web still works. And is it inefficient? I don't know. It's 10 cents for a million or 2 million requests of Lambda. It seemed pretty efficient to me. Might not be efficient to AWS, but from my perspective as a customer, it's plenty fine for most cases. And then, yeah, the other two hot terms, I guess that I should ask, like, do we have anything else to add on the ISR, DSR?
I have some thoughts. What about you, Nick? Do you want to chime in there?
Yeah, I don't know. I was trying to think because I hadn't heard of these terms before, and that's because I really haven't done a ton with Netlify or Vercel. And so from that standpoint, it does seem more like marketing, just because like you said, it is locked into their respective stacks. And then I started thinking about how I would, like, as a developer, work with this and work with it locally. And I guess, could you possibly have with both of these, because you kind of have almost two different renders or two different ways to getting to that, could you have bugs that get introduced at that point potentially?
Yeah, I mean, ideally there is this immutability and everything's going to be the same every time. And I think in the case of your website is inert or static and not really based on dynamic changing data, then probably is pretty deterministic. Inputs the same, the outputs always going to be the same. These things will introduce a dynamic process at runtime, which is definitely walking in the non-determinism path. Could it introduce bugs? Yeah. Will it? I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah.
How often and what kind of bugs? Like, Lambda's down and you're depending on that to render your thing. That's a bad day. But if Lambda's down, lots of people are having a bad day. So
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah, I mean, seriously, that was kind of the thought for me, is like, it totally seems like a very undeterministic way of like having users, like experience your website. And there's so many paths, there's just users kind of creating their own journey, and like, you don't know what combination or permutation of stuff is gonna like cause something weird. And for me, it feels like there's, there's the whole how do I lose weight question, right? Like, just exercise and eat generally okay. And I feel like just ship less JavaScript and, keep it lean and, use tools like web workers that have been around in the browser for a very, very long time. All the major browsers have had them for a while, to kind of do some prefetching or whatever. Like, I feel like there's existing patterns that like use open web technologies where you can achieve like the same or better results even without being locked into like a stack per se or a service provider contract, or you know what I mean? So in that sense, like I don't know,
Yeah, it's not an easy one, because I mean, if you've committed to this architecture and you're stoked on it and your builds are blowing up at 2 hours, that's a problem. You need better iteration speed,
right?
So any solution, any band-aid along the way, I think is probably acceptable. If your builds are 2 hours though, and now you're adding band-aids, it might be time to evaluate, hey, this data is kind of dynamic. maybe it's time for us to consider not
trying to pre-baking everything. Yeah. And that gets into something else that we'll cover in just a bit, which is really some of the decision, like, how do you kind of develop a rubric for yourself and your team and your product, around like, what solutions do you really need? And, with trying to kind of be as objective as possible, because, it's really tempting to do the hot new thing, but really, like, what do you need is, often different than like, what do you want to do? There's
so many weird stakeholders in this problem too. So I mentioned this at the beginning, but it's World Accessibility Day, and that's an important topic for this whole thing, that the end consumer, the web consumers out there, are our responsibility as web authors. And if we believe in things. I'm sorry if you hear a chainsaw right now. My neighbor is creating a sawmill apparently. It's kind of fitting though. If you hear the chainsaw, that's what it is like in Canada. There's always a guy bucking up timber somewhere nearby. Anyways,
drinking maple syrup.
Yeah, drinking maple syrup, bucking timber, playing hockey. We this is unbelievable. I don't know if you can hear it. It's like
really yeah, it's okay. It's not that bad here really at all. Yeah.
COVID times. Anyways, back to the world of incremental render and static and all that. The end consumer, the web consumer, is our responsibility. And whoever they are, your customer is who you want to be working backwards from. And if you really do care about this thing and your craft, then you're going to work backwards from a place of the most inclusive, most accessible place. And accessibility isn't just about people with disabilities. It's also about people on low bandwidth devices. It's about people in networks that might be hostile, countries that might be hostile. And so this is a huge amount of power we have. There's not a lot of web developers compared to how many humans there are on the planet.
And how important the web is.
Yeah, and it's our privilege to be able to author for this platform. And as part of that is it's our responsibility to live up to this lens. And so that's where I'd like to start the rubric of thinking, like how do we be the most inclusive thing possible for the most people possible? And that will start with rendering HTML. There's a version of this story that doesn't involve rendering HTML. You need it to render that script tag. And this isn't to say that you have to work with JavaScript disabled, but I think you should try. And I think this is going to get a little challenging for some folks because they're going to want to say, oh, everyone's got JavaScript enabled. And you're right, most people do, but 1% of people don't. And that's actually millions of people. And those people matter too.
Yeah, they do. I mean, I feel like the web it's a protocol and there's lots of different clients, and browsers are certainly the most popular client, but terminals are clients, Emacs browsers are clients, and and we don't need to optimize for the I would say minority use case, but it's important for us to include it in this, what I mean? Give those folks something, and yeah, because otherwise, 1% of the web is like millions of people, and yeah, it's just really important to build a web that's open to everybody and not just the select few. So but that being said, there's some interesting kind of other movements around like islands, partial hydration, and one for me, I don't know if we'll have time to get into too much of those, but one for me that's very exciting and radical is Astro from Fred Schott. He's kind of creator of Snowpack and Skypack, and been kind of a huge advocate of ESM on the web for a long time. Worked on something called Pika Package a while ago that morphed a bit, but it was basically like, hey, how do we identify ESM compat dependencies in npm? But anyway, so Fred Schott is collaborating with some folks on this project called Astro. It's still very much in development, but we'll link to a demo and a talk that he did at Speakeasy.js, where he showed this framework, this JavaScript framework that only renders HTML by default. And if you want to render JavaScript and you want to have that level of interactivity, it's something that you have to be intentional about. So it's kind of flips the script. So instead of by default rendering, lots of JavaScript and yada, yada, yada. Like if you want the JavaScript that you need, you have to be intentional about when it's loaded and when it's used. And, it's almost like JavaScript on a tap, it's like where you get to turn it off and on. But yeah, I mean, any kind of thoughts on Astro and
Astro, I'm thrilled with. They're absolutely speaking my language, although they're using different words for the same things, but that's fine. So Astro to me is really all about progressive enhancement. Progressive enhancement, though, does start from the world where this will fall back to links and forms that work. Astro, that's still a bit of an opt-in, but it's pushing in the right direction where we're going to prioritize an initial render that is content aware, not a bunch of spinners. And I think that the other, they're not saying progressive enhancement because they want to specifically call out the islands architecture kind of angle of this. Islands architecture idea is you separate your app not only into components, but into independent apps, almost like little mini applications in the page, and they progressive enhance themselves independent of each other. And this is interesting and nice because you could have different component systems evolving in the same document. So you could have your Vue.js component beside your React component beside your whatever other components there are out there. And that's kind of neat. This is common and this happens a lot. I was on a call this morning with some other CTOs who were at a bigger company than mine. They were in the midst of the migration from Ember to React, and predictably they had both. And they imagine they will have both for the next 4 or 5 years because they're not turning off their business. And so something like Astro is really interesting because this is going to give us an evolutionary path out of these big rewrites where we might actually see systems being composed out of the older systems that'll play nice. That was always kind of the promise. We've never been able to load a React component from a Svelte component, from a Vue component. The idea that we could start combining these things into larger documents is pretty cool.
Yeah, I was curious, how is this? Can you elaborate for folks how this is different than micro front ends?
God, I don't know.
Which is like,
yeah,
not a path like,
yeah.
For me, like that trend, like came and went, right? Like thank God, RIP. But it's interesting, but
it's like a bunch of frameworks where we're going to be the Rails except for a client side. Like Ember was saying this, and others have said this over the years. And I think it's a neat idea. The concerns are different, and the reason that we were doing things in one place maybe doesn't apply client side to one user at a time. I think micro front ends was one of those things where it's like, as soon as you saw it, you're like, this doesn't actually make sense. But Islands architecture does, and I think they might be the same thing. So it's really a messaging issue.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I feel like I'm like, what's the distinction? And is it like
one feels icky and one feels like a place where I'd get a pina colada. That sounds nice.
Honestly, it's just reminding me of like when I first got into at my first job. I can't remember what they were called, but we basically had the same thing. And I don't know if we called them like applets. It wasn't like Java applets, but it was portlets. Thank you.
Yeah,
that's
JSF.
It.
Yeah, I remember that. Oh yeah, that was fun.
No, was it?
Well, I mean, right. Well, I mean, so we could do a whole show on decision making, but if we could kind of summarize.
Did we lose her?
I don't know. I thought it was me, so.
I did too.
No. This is classic Zoom times right here. Someone's frozen. Everyone's unsure if it's them. Oh boy.
Well, presumably we're still live.
Yeah, it's so funny. Like, I never got a chainsaw, and I was like, who needs a chainsaw? A few weeks into this, I'm like, maybe I need a chainsaw.
No, she's gone.
Completely.
Yeah.
I think what we were going to maybe talk about was a decision-making rubric for this. When to SSR, when to DSR, when to partially hydrate your progressive enhancements. And I think for me personally, if I could just give any advice at all, I'd say let's start with our web consumers and let's try and be inclusive. Let's observe as many accessibility practices as we can and build up from there. And I think good things happen. And I think the path to getting there is unfortunately never going to be one answer.
Right.
If your team is stoked on Vue, don't be the guy saying, let's use React. Use Vue. If, web components are working for you and you enjoy low-level DOM APIs, that's wonderful. Like, stick with that. That's gonna serve you well. If you're a consultancy and you just need to turn and burn, marketing websites that are gonna get shut off in 6 months, by all means, client-side render that thing.
So really think about the audience for the particular application that you're working with and follow that, not necessarily what is at the top of Hacker News right now.
That's right. And think about your responsibility as a web developer and the privilege that is to be able to do this job. And I think that if you follow those rules, you're never going to go wrong. You're going to rewrite your front end anyway, so you might as well have fun doing it.
Yeah.
Cool. We solved it. The internet is fixed.
It looks like it might be for Amal. She says she's coming back right now.
Oh, awesome. This is how it goes. So I got to ask, did you paint data in Picard?
I did not. No. Okay. They came from Etsy.
Those are wonderful. Those should be in the show notes.
I'll add them.
I'm just curious. I thought they were black velvet pages at first. That would be the only thing that would have made those even better.
That would be amazing.
You're back.
Oh my gosh. I know. I'm so sorry. I don't even know how I sound or if it's like, if I'm buffering or not, because I'm tethering on my phone. It looks like my internet went down. So it's like so ironic. Too much web love going on. So yeah, I don't know, Nick, did we just take a pause?
We talked a little bit more. We kind of, Brian kind of assumed what you were going to ask, and that was kind of about the rubric for deciding. And so we talked about that.
Yes. Oh, cool. All right. Awesome. So I think I finished my question locally. So I'm sorry, Jared, for the nightmare local, like editing later, but I did finish my question locally and you answered it, right? Yes. I
assume so. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I was like, all right, yeah, I don't know if we could just close. I think I can do a closing thought and then we can finish. I just don't I didn't hear your answer, so I'm assuming that was, I
basically said, use accessibility as your rubric for
oh yes,
for your web consumers as web authors. That's probably one of our biggest responsibilities, and there is no easy answers there. Different audiences are going to have different needs, and being inclusive is going to look different ways over the years. And so I think that's just it's kind of like security and performance. There's no moment where you're like, we did it. We're secure, we're performant, and we're accessible. No, it's not like that. It's an ongoing, continuous improvement situation. We'll never be perfect, but we're going to try to be perfect anyways.
Yeah, no, totally. That was the perfect answer. I couldn't, I really think we should blog about that and like something that we coin, or because really using accessibility as your guide is the best way to create not just performant user experiences, but like delightful ones too for everybody, so it's just a healthy it's a healthy North Star, so thank you so much for sharing that. And so yeah, this was such a lot to fit into an hour, maybe even a little bit more than that, but we're excited to have had a chance to dive into this with you. Thank you so much, Brian. There'll be lots of links in the show notes, and we're excited that the web is continuing to evolve and push and question and iterate. So very privileged to be contributors to this wonderful platform. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thank you, Brian.
Now my neighbor stops chasing.
Okay, cool.
It's like,
yes.
I fucking swear. I could book meetings by this. Oh, I know when that's going to stop. The minute my meeting's over.
Yeah.
Hey.
Brian, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that was a pleasure. I love talking about this stuff. I could do it all day. It's my vibe.
This was very educational. You went to school a few times. So.
Yeah, I don't even know when I'm doing that, so hopefully it made sense. Sometimes co-founders will have to rein me in. Yo, dude, you just did not make any sense. Take that one back to English.
Yeah, and Jared, sorry for the editing nightmare.
It's all right. We'll work it out. We'll figure something out.
Cool. I'm glad. I don't know. I'm almost wondering what we should call this show. It's a tough one. It's like, first of all, anytime I get to use the word evolution is like a good day for me, but obviously that's like overkill, I'm sure. There's
that was actually really interesting. I like the evolution versus revolution mental model and try and apply that when I think about some of these things. And I think it's actually a really useful way to position stuff. Yeah, it was cool. It was good timing for that one. I haven't considered that on the client render versus server render. That was a bit of a funny evolution. We at the revolution was going all client render, and now the evolution is trying to find a way to hybridize these things.
Yeah, there's a lot that's happened in this space. We don't really talk about it enough because we're just in the thick of it all, It's like we're at an airport and we're just trying to find our gate, It's like, I just need to catch my flight, It's like constantly in catch your flight mode with JavaScript. Like we don't have time to reflect and think enough,
Yeah, I totally agree. It's compounding too. It's not getting better. Earlier this year, I was like, oh, there's going to be more JavaScript runtimes. Haha, Deno. And then a week later, Amazon announced their new one, which is for their cloud functions, which is not Node or Deno. It's its own thing. And now I've seen another one in the pipeline coming that probably a lot of people are going to use. This shit's going to get way more complicated is basically what's going on.
Yeah, but that is scary though with Amazon's runtime, just because I feel like not just the fragmentation, but it takes away resources from open projects like Node that really need it, and and where those runtimes are actually in use all around the world, and
Yeah, even that they lifted it out of Nginx and forked quietly. So it's and the Nginx guys aren't talking publicly about it yet, but they're not happy. And there's some weird vibes there for sure. Definitely.
Yeah, but people need to
based on their
update
Lua
licenses.
scripting engine that's in there, or what exactly do they pull out?
It is weird. It's called NJS. If you Google NJS Nginx, you'll find it. It's written in C, not C++, and it's brand new. It's its own. It's only 1,000 files. It's a very small interpreter, but it doesn't have any network or file access, and it's not JITted or anything fancy like that. So it executes really fast, but only once. And so there's a degree of determinism to it that they like. And so they have this thing called VTL that they use for. It's like a Java templating language that they use for configuration management inside of AWS for binding different services to each other, but nobody wants to learn it. So now they're saying, well, if you know JavaScript, you can do that. And it's this fancy JavaScript runtime that they're kind of inventing and forking themselves. We'll see where that goes. It's new.
What's the name of it again? NJS?
NJS, yeah, but it's forked, so it's its own thing now called CloudFront Functions in preview, which ostensibly will be the competitor to Cloudflare's thing. And if this is confusing because they already have a thing called Lambda Edge, then yes, it is confusing because there is another thing called Lambda Edge, and that's just Amazon for you. They've got 10 different ways from Tuesday to do everything.
Yeah, and they never deprecate any of them.
Nope.
That's always support for all of them.
Yeah, it's a weird strategy. I don't know how long that lasts, but it seems to be working for them still.
I think what's confusing for me is like how this is a strategic move for their engineering team. Like, just because you get so much with open source that's widely used, everything from like security to just like, you know, all of the like bells and whistles around, like there's a train that's moving and you could not show up or show up, but it's still moving, right? How is it like a strategic thing to like, you know, have your own proprietary thing and like you just get away from a well-managed like runtime environment, like, you know?
Yeah, they're not thinking like that though. They're all these cells that are separate and compete. Like it's not an organizational strategy. It's a service by service, make up stuff as we go kind of strategy. And they're taking so many swings, most of them miss. So it's very common to be like, this AWS thing shipped and it's garbage. But occasional swings really land, like Lambda, and turn into multi-billion-dollar run rate businesses. Right. So they can afford it. You know, there's 10 directions to go. Which direction do I go? I'm a startup. There's mutually exclusive choices. You're Amazon. You take 11 directions. You take them all. Bets. Yep. Yeah. And I don't see this slowing down.
Yeah.
So who knows? Yeah. Well.
Yeah. Fun to watch.
Oh boy. Well, yeah, fun to watch and like fun to. We're practitioners in this industry, Jared. This affects you, by the way. This was like a union meeting without like it being a union meeting. Okay, it's like there's a new thing, kids. Like, you know, we need to decide if we're going to use it or not. You know, like you can always vote with your feet, which is nice, but I don't know. We'll see. It's voting with your feet is hard when there's large centralized services that are pushing things down like company throats, and like when you have people that are not like technical experts making strategic decisions for teams. Or
the thing that's wild to me, I totally agree, the centralization is a massive issue and extremely scary. That ostensibly the solution is going to be that we federate and distribute this problem, which is sort of pointing towards crypto. So it's kind of like one of those like, oh my God, no, not like that. like it's bad now, but that could be way worse in so many ways. But luckily the transactions are still too slow to matter. So I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon.
Slow, too expensive.
Yeah. But anyways.